year out. These guys became two of my closest friends over there. Amir was even my roommate there for a while. And they would later go on to found Supergiant, but more on that in a little bit. Amir was a designer making campaign missions for real-time strategy games. Gavin is just like a general whiz kid. He was like an AI designer. He had been working at EA since...
Oh, I need the mic. My voice is on power. I feel so crushed. Okay. Now it's more formal. I see how it is. Okay. Yeah, Gavin had been working at EA since he was like 17, or I don't even know if it was legal. He started in like QA and had worked on games since like Yuri's Revenge and General. So he was a veteran on this team despite his young age. But yeah, they were good dudes. We had good times over there. You know, this is a great team. They were making like highly rated, multi-million selling real-time strategy games on basically like a yearly basis. These games had about a year of development time each. And you know, our dream over there was always like, maybe one day we'll be able to have a little bit more time, so maybe we could work on something at the level of like a Company of Heroes or a StarCraft 2 or whatever. That was our dream. And it was fun to think about the future, and we had our high hopes. But as it happens, you know, the future can be unpredictable, both at EA and at other places. And one day, the guy who was our beloved executive producer got promoted to the general manager of the studio. There was much rejoicing, but not very long after that, he actually left the company altogether, and he went to a company called Zynga, which at the time no one had ever heard of. It's kind of interesting. As for the rest of us, we got moved to like the semi-aborted, rebooted Steven Spielberg project, which was pretty surreal. We're like people making real-time strategy games, so that did not really go so well. So we were at a point where we're like, okay, what's going on here? I got very anxious at this point because I had continued to commute from Northern California, and I felt like my work wasn't really going anywhere. To keep myself sane, I was playing, yeah, they're showing up. I had been, you know, I'd always played a lot of games. I was playing a lot of Street Fighter 4, but I was also playing games like these that were made by like really small teams in comparison to the team that I was on. And it was just kind of mind-boggling to me that really small groups of people could make games that were so good and felt, you know, really personal and meaningful in comparison to these. Kind of weird feedback on this, I apologize. Sorry if you can hear me in the back. Yeah, so you know, I think games like that really planted the seed for us, and we started thinking about how would we do things if we did things on our own. You know, if people weren't moving us around like chess pieces, or I shouldn't even use a chess piece analogy because chess requires strategy, but if we were being moved around like you know, what would we do if we could just do whatever we wanted? So in August of 2009, Amir, Gavin, and I all quit EA like a week or two apart. And here we had a lot of formative discussions about what we would do, like the kind of work environment, the kind of studio environment we'd like to be in, you know, a lot of pie-in-the-sky ideas about the kind of games we would make if we could. And Amir and Gavin soon decided that they're like gonna do it. Now, if you're in this room, hopefully you've played Bastion, but if not, I'm about to spoil it for you. Near the end of the game, there is a moment of choice that comes up, I think, rather suddenly. It's, I think, a difficult choice because there isn't a right answer. And I think interesting choices are those types of choices, where you make, you know, either a rational decision or an emotional decision, or maybe a little of each, and you move forward with that. This was such a moment for me, and even though Bastion is a game that's very much about like overcoming regret and not looking back at the choices that you make, nevertheless, I made a choice that I look back on quite a bit, which was that my path ended up diverging from Amir's and Gavin's at that point. Again, because I'd been commuting to LA for a while, I was fearing for everything from my marriage to my mental health at that moment, and I felt like I maybe reached a point in my life where I could not take the kind of risk that these guys were about to take. I had to just kind of go home and be with my family and sort everything else out after that. Ideally, I would find a way to stay in the game industry while maintaining some level of self-respect and just kind of sort things out. Luckily for me, I was able to get a job at 2K Games working on a game called Spec Ops: The Line that was has its own interesting stories around it. I was a big fan of 2K, and I ended up working there for a year. Meanwhile, in the fall of 2009, Amir and Gavin were here, the living room of a house in San Jose, California, and they started working on this action RPG where you build the world around you, and it was tentatively called Bastion. This man is the owner of the house. He's also Amir's father. He's kind of this awesome world traveler dude at this point. He has his own very interesting past. And the advice he gave to Amir at the time was basically, you should start a company now, because if you fail, you could go right back to the workforce and it's not going to kind of matter too much. You know, you'll be out a bunch of money, but you'll still have most of your life ahead of you. He was, in other words, very encouraging of his son at that moment, and that was very fortunate. The home, you know, being able to work where they lived meant it was I think just necessary to what these guys did at this point, because it meant that they weren't like burning through their meager savings from day one. They were able to nearly zero out their expenses, and so, you know, at a point when they're just getting off the ground, trying to like get any semblance of a game up and running, that was important, that they weren't like on a ticking clock, you know, from day one. I'm a big believer in luck. I may not say it explicitly much in this talk, but I feel like above all we were very lucky at many of the decision points that we came to, and with a lot of what happened. But I feel that luck was, you know, circumstance and luck were at the heart of how Supergiant Games started. You know, Amir grew up in this very same house, like playing Dungeons and Dragons and like Fallout and all kinds of different games, and he winds up in the same house, you know, making his first game on his own terms. It's just a strange set of circumstances, but, you know, under those set of circumstances, try to make the most of it. There's a lot to do, but at the same time, I feel like in this day, it's never been easier in a lot of respects to get up and running, because you can use like off-the-shelf PCs and, you know, home DSL, things like Skype, Google Docs, and whatever. Like, just to get up and running is relatively straightforward with a new studio when it's small. To whatever extent Electronic Arts was an informal place, this you know, Supergiant was even more so. It's just these two guys living and working here. You know, they kept their ambitions very modest initially. It's like we had these ideas around what Bastion might be, but like they're just trying to get, coming from making real-time strategy games, they're just trying to get like the character like moving on the screen, swinging a hammer or whatever. Like your narrative ambitions don't matter at all, like until you can get, you know, until you can get some kind of video game going. This is the best photograph in this presentation. I warn you now. But this dog does not believe in the prospects of Supergiant Games, I think. You know, working from home had its upsides and its downsides for these guys. You know, Gavin would like, his car would just like die every few weeks because he'd just like go for weeks without, you know, ever driving his car. You know, these guys, I think they loved what this place was able to do for them, but at the same time, over time they started going a little stir crazy and didn't want to be in this place forever. But it was perfect for what they were trying to do at the time. A few months into development, this was Bastion. This is like before the end of 2009. So if you look carefully and are familiar with the game of Dungeons and Dragons, you'll notice all of these monsters are like stolen shamelessly from like the monstrous manual. There's no artists on the project, it's just these guys prototyping gameplay. Some of the early ideas from Bastion did actually like survive all the way through development from this point. Things like the world rising up around you and the feel of certain moves from like the evasive roll to the hammer and so on. So they had something that like started to feel like a real video game. But, you know, it looked like this. This is not something to give to a polite company. So they were starting to get a little worried at this point. They realized that they needed help. Like they could not make like a kind of a real game on their own. So help arrived in some unlikely forms. First was this gentleman by name of Darren Korb, a close friend of Amir's from when they were kids. Darren is like a musician by background, and he never worked on a game or anything like that, but he was good at the music making, and Darren asked him to provide some music and do some sound effects and stuff like that. The other person who started helping around this time is Logan Cunningham, who's a mutual friend of theirs from when they were like 10 years old, playing soccer in middle school. Logan was he was like tearing movie ticket stubs in New York at the time, like a struggling actor. He's an actor, and he happens to have a good voice. And Amir asked him if he could record a few lines, because we did have these thoughts about what the narrative, like we wanted this game to have narrative. We saw that as an opportunity in the action RPG genre, but we didn't want the narrative to like interrupt the play experience with walls of text, and we couldn't do cutscenes or anything like that. So Amir one day is like, hey, maybe voiceover is the ticket. Added some voiceover to the game, and along with Darren's music, suddenly, suddenly this game had like an atmosphere and a mood, and those are things that we thought were important. So they were finally getting somewhere. If you looked past the D&D art, you could start to feel something about the game. This is like early in 2010, I guess, at this point. They worked with a number of different artists on like a contract basis. And the game, really started to take shape at this point. It was kind of incoherent still, but like it started to look and feel like a real game. They were really onto something. This was around GDC, I guess, of 2010. But at this point they could have kept going, but they felt like something just wasn't quite right. Like this wasn't the look that they were totally happy with. So they kept struggling to find the right artist, and then they met Gen Z through a close mutual friend. Jen was working at a company called Gaia Online at the time, making free-to-play MMOs. And you like look at her DeviantArt page or whatever, and it's like, man, I don't know what you think, but when I saw this stuff, I thought it was amazing. I thought she was a rare talent, and Amir and Gavin, started working with her, and sure enough, she provides this look for the game that really like held up its end of the bargain, and then some in comparison to whatever was going on with the audio. Suddenly we had this like a storybook kind of the fantasy frontier world that existed thus far kind of only in our imaginations, and finally Bastion was starting to look like a real thing. It was around this time that Amir got the news that Bastion was accepted into the PAX 10, which meant that our game, or their game at the time, would be featured at the Penny Arcade Expo. They'd give you a table and give you a screen, and you could show your game for free. And they had no money to do this kind of thing on their own, so this was a really big opportunity. At the point the game was unannounced, and like this was a chance to get out there and hopefully make a splash. The guys really hauled ass at this point to like pull the game together and make it look like pretty close to how it ended up finally looking. This was also another moment in my life where I was faced with a choice, because Amir and I had been talking, and the opportunity came up for me to reunite with this team. They're about to go into full production, like a really key moment in this game's development, and so, long story short, obviously I accepted, but convincing, my family at the time, my son was just born like 2 weeks prior to this. Like, what would you say if I quit my good, solid job at 2K Games and, accepted a job with little prospects of success and started mooching off my parents for the first time since I was 17? Does that sound like a good career move at this time? But I said it less cynically than that, and made a more sincere case, and thankfully my family was very supportive, and thankfully I had a family that I could, frankly, mooch off of for a period of time, and so obviously I signed on. They wanted me to work on the story of the game. That was something I was very excited about and always wanted to do, and I contributed to level design as well. But this is me basically, you know, I joined right before we all piled into a van and drove 17 hours to Seattle to show Bastion for the first time. And then at PAX, you know, we had our screen and everything. And PAX was just, I think, really one of the best experiences that any of us had ever had. It was unbelievable, the response that we got to this game. So many people coming by and playing it. Like I'd been working in game development for several years at that point, but I'd actually never seen like people visibly show like joy at like playing a game I'd worked on. I'm the sort of person who just, I may be playing my favorite game ever, I'm still sitting there like stone faced. You could never tell that I like the thing. But so I didn't know that people like emoted that way when they played games. So that was really remarkable. Things that we thought would be pretty polarizing, like the use of narration, were like, at least at PAX, they were like unanimously well liked. So that was, you know, not only that, we started to meet these folks in the like small game development community that we like frankly in a lot of cases we like idolized, and these guys are like giving us the time of day and giving us advice and stuff. It was just amazing. And then we went home and played Magic. You know, the drive was like really grueling, but I think it was like a really, you know, it's the really good like sort of team bonding experience, especially someone like me. I obviously knew Amir and Gavin from a long time ago, but I'd never met Darren and Jen at that point. Once we got back, there was much to do. You know, we had a whole game to make. We showed like the 20-minute opening in PAX, but everything else was still to come. We went into full production mode and started building out the rest of the content. We set a really good deadline for ourselves, which was the IGF submission. That was like a couple of months later, so we wanted to, you know, have like the first hour of the game or something like that ready for then. And we also got a lot of interest from potential publishers, which we were interested in talking to them. Although the game was self-funded, we needed a publisher in order to get onto Xbox Live Arcade, which was a platform we were very interested in at that time. So that was, yeah, there was a lot of activity there. But, you know, this was our team during the holidays of 2010, and we've been, you know, working, but making really good progress and feeling pretty good. The one thing was, though, we wanted Bastion to come out on both console and PC, console first and foremost, and it was not yet running on console, so we needed help. That help came in the form of this man, Andrew Wang, who joined as our CTO. Andrew had come from working on Modern Warfare 1 and 2, so Bastion must have been like an interesting change of pace going from games like that. So the first few months of 2010 were super intense, because we were done with the game around May, so we had to build all the content, get it running on Xbox and all that stuff. We were finalists in 2 IGF categories, so we got to go to the IGF and GDC that year in 2011. That was a really amazing experience for us, getting to go to the awards and, you know, once again just be like immersed in this community that we, you know, even working at EA, like it still seemed like something something that where the grass was greener on the other side in that community. Another really key thing that I just remembered last night I want to mention here is like we went to the Team Meet GDC talk, or I did, and in it they revealed, you know, how well Super Meat Boy had done on Steam relative to Xbox Live Arcade, and like that significantly affected our own planning. Like at that point, we thought Bastion was like basically going to be a console. You know, we're making like a console-style game, looks kind of like a JRPG or something like that. We thought people wouldn't really care on PC, and after this, we're like, hey, maybe PC is going to be a thing, and that was actually the case. Back to the publisher thing. So at this point, our conversations with a couple of folks were pretty far along, and like I said, despite self-funding, we needed a publisher at this point since we wanted to be on console, and we wanted to work with someone who was going to like stay out of our hair and let us do our thing, like really believed in the game for what it was. And we found that partner in Warner Brothers in our case. We announced that partnership at PAX East a few weeks after GDC. And they, you know, with Warner Brothers' help, we were able to have this presence at PAX East. Like we could have never done this at this point in development because we were just busy making the whole game. I don't think we would have gone to PAX East at all if not for that. But that turned out to be a really good show for us that helped, I think, like raise a lot of awareness around the game. Then, you know, we just had to finish the thing. And this came the most intense period of Bastion's development. Notice, I want to make a point here, which is that I don't have, all these photos I'm showing, it's like people take pictures of the good times. Like, you don't take pictures of people like clutching their heads in despair at like 4 in the morning or whatever. So imagine there are a whole bunch of those that would go in this space. We took some video actually, but not a lot of photos. But yeah, these gaps in time is when like a lot of the real heavy lifting got done. And but we somehow pulled it together. By the time we went to E3 in what was it, like June or yeah, it was June. The game was basically done and in submission. And Warner Brothers once again really kind of pulled out all this. We couldn't have gotten this kind of banner made for ourselves. It was pretty remarkable. We got the news that we got into Summer of Arcade, which was like a huge, we were really stoked about that on the team because again, these games like Braid and Castle Crashers were really our spiritual influences. So to follow in their footsteps in Summer of Arcade really meant a lot to us, and also boded well, I think, for our prospects, like from the, honestly commercially, because at this point we're wondering what's gonna. Like, we're rapidly running out of our meager budget, and we're like, well, whether or not this game sells will determine whether or not we continue on as a team, and we wanted to continue on. But at the time we had a really good E3, a lot of people were telling us like, oh, you're gonna knock it out of the park, which is like, is kind of like, I don't know, it was awkward hearing that before the thing was done. We were all very, not only superstitious, but I think we always kind of expect the worst and hope for the best, so we weren't sure what was going to happen. The game came out on July 20th on XBLA. It sold about 35,000 copies or so in its first week, which was like, it's good, but not, compared to like Limbo or something the previous year, it's like a small fraction. So it's not like a grand slam home run or something like that. But certainly, the reviews are really good. The sales were solid, and we're like, cool. This was not a complete disaster, thankfully. The game came out on PC. Just 3 weeks later, we were anxious to get the game out on PC for a variety of reasons. That launch went pretty smooth. It was great to be able to like rapidly update that version of the game and to have like a much more direct conversation with fans of the game. They're not just fans, but anyone who bought it and was having problems or something. So yeah, that was intense. And then things started to simmer down. The game was out, the reviews had landed. The sales are starting to decline, and we're just like, I guess we should start putting our lives back together or something like that. We weren't quite sure what to make of what happened. The excitement around the game before it came out was like huge, and then we're just like, we just weren't sure. It was like stuck in the middle of a whirlwind. And so anyway, there was more work to be done, although not quite as insanely as leading up to the launch. We did things like release the soundtrack for the game. The soundtrack was like, of all the aspects of the game, the single most highly regarded part of Bastion in like a really remarkable way. I feel like music is like such a subjective thing that someone's just gonna hate your music or whatever, just cause. But it seemed like everybody loved the game's soundtrack. So Darren and Logan spent weeks like packaging and mailing CDs from Darren's apartment there. Soon enough, another PAX rolled around in September. It was kind of a weird show. The game was out. We didn't have much of a crowd. We're just like, we didn't want to like lose our spot there or whatever. Well, show up, show our PC version, but it didn't have the same feel as the previous shows. And then we played Mansions of Madness, which is like way worse than Magic. The thing, okay, at least, not to sound too down on ourselves, I mean, at this point it was becoming clear that like, hey, we survived. Like, we get to stick around and do more stuff. So our next order of business was to find a new place to work, because at this point, Gavin and Amir are like, love you, man, but let's find a more reasonable living arrangement. We wanted to be more centrally located in San Francisco. And Amir's dad was also like coming home. There was like a practical need to get the heck out of there. So we needed to find, I don't know, something that felt right to us. And what we found was this strange little studio space in San Francisco. We didn't want anything too office-y. And you know, we used the first money that we got to buy this ridiculous fountain. It was really awkward, so we put some plants in it. And then we just like turned it off because everyone like had to go pee all the time. It's just bubbling. It's like standing next to a waterfall. So that thing is still there, but anyway, we ironically bought a fountain. This place had a very different vibe to it. We're still there now, but obviously, like if you've ever been to suburban San Jose, this is pretty different. But an interesting change of scenery that took some adjustment. But more choices were at stake for us, especially what to work on next. Now, following Bastion's now emerging success, we got some very exciting work for hire opportunities, actually, on franchises that we had a lot of respect for. And also, even though we designed Bastion as like a standalone experience that was supposed to be self-contained and might well be the last game we ever make and all that, it was meant to be the kind of world that could potentially support any number of stories. And a common theme from people who like the game would be like, can't wait for the sequel. So like the idea of making a sequel is like an obvious, potentially obvious direction. So there was that. And of course, we could also just try something new. And with fewer resource constraints, this time around the whole team there from day one, whatever that game could be would be limited largely by our own imaginations. And it was here that ideas for our next project, really started incubating. There were some conversations earlier, but really it was in the fall of 2011 that we started figuring things out. We got a lot of positive feedback around Bastion's vibe and atmosphere, and like having done this weird fantasy frontier world, we were just interested to find out what we could come up with if we did something in like the sci-fi vein. Like what would be our, if this was our take on fantasy, what would our take on science fiction be? And we were kind of in love with these looming, science fiction cityscapes and things of that nature. And as interesting as some of these opportunities were, when we came down to it, we realized that the thing that was the most important to us was maintaining our independence and making something from scratch again. Like we've done this once, and it was awesome. And we fought so hard to get here, and so many people, including people at like AAA studios, would kill to be in this position. Why would we give this up? Why should we try this again? And we realized we wanted to stick in the action RPG genre because Bastion, in a lot of ways, was like, we explored this genre in ways that were interesting to us, and even having done that game, we felt that there were all these other places we could go, that may not have made sense for Bastion, but still, within the framework of the action RPG were very interesting to us. So we started kicking around ideas there. The days took on a different kind of feel. We were working much more like normal hours at this point. One of the interesting advantages of working on like a really gnarly street in San Francisco is like, you don't want to stay there too late. As soon as the sun is setting, you're like, I better go. Whereas in San Jose, we're like, I'm working all night, doesn't matter. And obviously you can't complain, like this is my commute in the morning. Why I'm taking photos on the Golden Gate Bridge is for you to decide. We had other choices at stake. Even though we were starting to kick around ideas on a new project, there were many opportunities surrounding Bastion popping up. It was a nice set of problems to have, honestly. It's like all these, all this stuff that we could do with this game to like kind of make the most of it and learn more and all sorts of different things, but it's a matter of deciding what to focus on. One of the things we focused on was this weird new Google initiative. We launched a version of Bastion that ran natively in the Chrome browser using a Google technology called Native Client. That came up as a thing that certainly we couldn't have planned for. And one day they're like, "Would you like to work with us on this new technology initiative?" And we're like, "All right, that sounds pretty interesting. For all we know, everyone's going to be playing games in their browsers in another couple of years." So it was like a good learning experience all around, and our engineers gained a lot of valuable insight out of it, and it pushed our own technology closer to where it is currently. Another thing we did as a one-off, late in 2012, we released like a one-off DLC thing. It was free on PC and cost $1 on XBLA. As sort of a thank you for fans, we wanted to see if we could do DLC in a way that didn't like try to continue the story because the game has a very kind of conclusive ending. We found a way to do it, and that was a cool experience. And it launched right around the time there was like a big winter sale for Steam, and you know, that basically it helped the game continue to do well. The game turned out to have much longer legs than we thought possible for like a single-player only game. This here is Mr. Michael Ailshire, who is the first person we hired after Bastion was released. He is our office manager. We needed someone to like keep the lights on at the studio. Basically, suddenly there was more upkeep than there used to be. We had, you know, we had bills to pay and things like that. And he was able to let us focus on game development while handling a lot of that stuff for us. He also managed the online store that we launched. Another thing we wanted to try, this was our period of, you know, try everything once. We're like, hey, you know, people are asking, this soundtrack has done really well, let's try a t-shirt, let's try an art print. This is stuff that people were actually asking us for and made like way more sense than like, you know, paid DLC or something for our game. And we designed all those items ourselves, and it was cool to like, working in the realm of making digital games, it was great to like make like physical goods and send them to people, you know, right from our studio with like handwritten notes and stuff like that. People, you know, it seemed to go really well. We had to think a lot about our growth as a studio. Suddenly, you know, we had some money, like for the first time ever, and we were like, hey, we can grow, we can hire people. And like none of us wanted to just hire people. Because so much of what we had, we felt, is like the chemistry of the people on the team. Or even if you bring in really good people, that chemistry might change in unexpected ways. So we're super careful and leery of who joins us, and you know, it just needs to be the right fit. That said, we identified like weaknesses on our team. We felt that we were like an incomplete team on Bastion. We had to shore up our weaknesses by calling in favors for friends who didn't work for us, who had other jobs. So, you know, we had to kind of reconcile how we felt about that stuff. By the end of 2011, to our, I guess to our surprise, Bastion had won over 100 awards and sold more than 500,000 copies. So I think this was the point where for us, it really started to sink in that this game actually was a success. So many games, you know, they have their sales in their first week, then they're off the radar, and for whatever reason, again, luck, circumstance, I'm sure I thank those things, thank my family, thank the Academy. You know, those may have had something to do with it, but Bastion did not fall off the radar, and it kept going. So this was suddenly, you know, it's our little moment in the sun, and you know, we get to go to GDC, the GDC Awards. This time we won something. Amir's getting invited to speak in Melbourne, Australia, and China, and Montreal. This is a cool slide. It's a slide about the movie Sunshine, or quoting the movie Sunshine, expressing something similar to our development process where, I can't read it. It's about, yeah, our process is not a democratic one. The person who has to do the work is the person who will make the decision about the work. So, you know, Jen, as the artist, will decide what happens in terms of the art and stuff like that. The writing and so on is my responsibility, and so on and so forth. We seek we seek unanimous decision as much as possible, but in the end, the buck stops with the person responsible for the stuff. Darren gave a GDC talk that was like one of the highest rated GDC talks that year about how he did all the audio. I got to do a GDC talk where I got to put up a Dark Crystal slide from hundreds of people. And then, you know, then there's another PAX East. This time the difference was we had Michael. We did the show entirely ourselves. This was our like biggest kind of show production. We wanted to gain that discipline ourselves because again we'd had great experiences at PAX thus far. This is the first time we like sold our own merchandise and stuff like that at PAX because you could do that. And to our to our amazement, the show basically paid for itself in what we made there, and people are more than happy to get this stuff. We showed our ugly, D&D prototype alongside the finished game. That was pretty fun and went over well. We got our like first cosplayer and was like, what it was awesome. But it was a weird time. We're still doing a lot of stuff with Bastion. We're trying to get it onto more platforms. because again, these opportunities kept coming up. Like we were talking to the Humble Bundle people at this point, and we were also really interested in potentially getting it on the iPad, which we told no one about, but over the holidays we got ourselves iPads, and like for all we know, people are only going to be playing games on touch devices. We better see what this thing is all about, lest the future, leave us in the dust. So we realized we needed a little more engineering firepower. So and we met just a guy who is Mr. Chris Journey, who joined us from Double Fine. He previously worked at Relic on games like Company of Heroes, which we were huge fans of. So he was able to help us, get the game on the more platforms. We launched on a Mac native version in April, and then we were in the Humble Bundle with a Linux native version in May, and then shortly after was in the summer was our 1-year anniversary, and at that point Bastion sold 1.3 million copies, including Humble Bundle sales. In comparison to that first slow week, is like we were just kind of beside ourselves, much greater than our most optimistic estimates before the game came out. But despite the revelry, I remember feeling really anxious at this point in time. We had been working on this iPad version of the game for weeks and then months, and it was just bad, like for a long time, because we weren't going to release it if it was bad, but we had to make a lot of changes to it in order to make it not bad. And it seemed, we were willing to spend as much time as we needed in order to do that, but it was the first time that we were working on something that really felt like it had no end in sight. So we're like, okay, what's going on with this thing? Like, what do we do? And we gave ourselves an arbitrary drop-dead date, which was Andrew, our CTO, he had a wedding coming up in August. And he was heavily involved in the engineering. And it's like, you know what? We'll have like a do or die decision before his wedding. We had a lot of concerns. We, listed all that stuff out, and in the end, we were able to solve those things. And even though it took 6 months, this version of the game came out in August of 2012, and we gutted the game from an engineering standpoint and like retuned, redesigned huge aspects of the game. We had no idea how people were going to take it, but it did really, really well, and we recouped all the kind of money that we poured into that version in about like a week. So that was a big relief. We went to another thing I should mention is that was the first time we had split our team. Like we had a lot of our team doing pre-production on our next project, and then the other half was on iPad for a long time. And then toward the end of iPad, we all dogpiled onto the iPad version just to get it done, and that's when it felt like momentum really came back. We got the spring back in our step, as it were. Because pre-production on our next game was actually going pretty slow. Another PAX came around, PAX Prime. We let people play the iPad version, get their hands on it for the first time. It was actually really cool to see that, we'd always liked the idea of making a game that like anyone could play, anyone could like pick up a controller and start playing Bastion. And this version was like, I think, in a lot of ways, the ultimate expression of that. Like, these guys who probably never held an Xbox controller or something like that were able to pick it right up. By this point, PAX had a pretty different feel. Like we had like fans. It was just like, people expressing their love of Bastion in ways that were pretty surprising to us. It made me, and I think all of us probably, all the more anxious to like make something new. It was now more than a year since we had released Bastion, and we'd still largely been working on Bastion. The iPad version was doing so well. Hey, all these people begging for an iPhone version. Well, it's not going to take too much more effort. Let's just do that. The iPhone 5 just got announced. We made that version of the game. That was cool. And these opportunities were still there. Like, hey, make Bastion for the Vita, make Bastion for the PS3, make Bastion for Android. And again, these are first world problems, absolutely. But as a team, we felt very strongly that each version of the game that we make needs to be as good or better than the previous versions. But at this point in time, we're like, we don't want to just port it. We want to like learn something, do something new every time we make a version of this game. And we didn't. The studio like wasn't created just to make Bastion. We want to do more stuff. So we're like, okay, that's it. Now everyone is on the new project. This is in the fall of 2012. All right, we couldn't resist. Amir and I had obsessively been playing Dota 2 for much of this year as we were calming down from making Bastion, and made this announcer pack as sort of a fan thing for Dota 2, and that was actually pretty popular. It was a lot of fun to do. It was like we recorded hundreds and hundreds of lines of our Bastion narrator saying things about Dota 2. It was surprisingly fun. Yeah, so we had a very Bastion Christmas, but at this point, we're like, okay, that's it. The line in the sand is drawn, and we're all on something new. Switching gears was tricky. We had, on the plus side, we had a full team from day one. All these, really good opinions, good ideas from many more people. On the minus side, many good ideas, many smart people all conversing. So I think we had fewer constraints. We had to I think the decisions that we made, we needled even kind of harder than we did on Bastion. The thing that we were interested in was, I mentioned previously, exploring this genre in new directions, not only kind of thematically and in the world design, but we wanted to capture the feel of classic turn-based strategy games and tactical games in like an action RPG context. We felt that there was something rich there, and that's kind of where we were prototyping. But we churned through a lot of ideas. Again, the fewer constraints and the more people involved made it tougher in some ways, and especially we felt like we had some big shoes to fill. At the same time, we didn't even though we had more people, our process is not necessarily to include everyone in every decision. That's the way that we preserve the culture that we have and the development environment that we have. It's sort of a need-to-know basis and trust-based system, I would say, where the people directly involved, everyone can give feedback on everything at all points, but when it comes down to really deciding certain aspects of the game, it's the people who will have to do the work who ultimately get say. In the end, certain ideas survived this relatively long pre-production process. The ideas for our protagonist character for this game dated actually all the way back to a drive returning from E3 the previous year before Bastion had even come out. We tried like a lot of different things in the process, but ended up coming back to that idea. And even like the name of the games, like the moment I saw this early painting of the character that Jen did, it was like the Transistor name just it came in a flash. That we considered many names, and that was like other things, that was the one that stuck. By the fall of 2012, we had a good sense for where we were going with this game finally, but we needed to start like building it for real. We'd just been prototyping. That's where this man came in. His name is Camilo Vanegas, and he brought our studio to 10 people. We had good luck hiring people with no previous industry experience, and Camilo is another example of that. He joined us as a 3D artist and animator, he previously, anytime we need an animation, we would have to call in a favor on Bastion, and that was not something that we felt we could continue doing indefinitely, and felt like we could just get a lot more iteration time and get to better quality if we had this kind of guy in house. And even though we're still our games are entirely 2D, we use 3D modeling and animation to then render out into thousands of frames of animation that would not be reasonable for a person to hand draw. What really struck us about Camilo was that he had we felt a rare talent for being able to take Jen's 2D painted artwork and translate it into 3D without kind of losing the look and feel of it. As a longtime game player, I feel like 3D and 2D can feel really kind of different. And we really wanted it to feel 2D, and Camilo brought that to our team. And here's me being a terrible dad over the holidays. I'm like playing Persona 4 or something like that. It's my son Isaac, and I'm just like worrying about what the hell we're going to do about this game. Because we're thinking about announcing it at PAX East, but even though we've been prototyping for a long time and building versions of the game, we just keep sort of redoing a lot of things. So the first few months of 2013 were by far our busiest since that time, just before Bastion launched, since when we were filing Bastion. We wanted to reveal the game at PAX, but we had a really long way to go just to pull a lot of things together. We really, we were play testing the game pretty heavily at this point, but that's not the same as announcing it and letting hundreds of people play it at PAX. And like we got all sorts of different feedback, and we just had a lot of concerns on team. The days before PAX were like super scary, honestly. We'd never announced a second game before, and different people on the team had different feelings about it. So we had like an 11th hour. We weren't even sure that we were gonna. We like came to the point when we thought we were gonna announce it, but we started to get cold feet. We weren't sure if we were really ready. But we pulled ourselves together and we're like, look, if we took another 6 months, like we'll like polish this or something, but like there aren't enough things that we would change about this. Like this is the point in time where we need to know what people at large think about this, because that would be very informative to what we do from here. So we pulled the trigger. We showed up at PAX East. We announced Transistor on March 19th, or something like that, and had it playable. A couple of days later, similar to what we did with Bastion. And man, that show was crazy. It was by far our biggest show ever, and people waited for like 2 or 3 hours to play our game, even though we brought like tons of stations for people to play on. Well, above all, we were just incredibly relieved by the response that we got. Among the people who played the game at PAX, who did not have to wait 2 hours, was this gentleman, Adam Boyes from Sony. He and the Sony team really liked what they played of the game, and they said they wanted to see it on PS4. We started talking to them, and much like with Bastion, we wanted Transistor to be on both console and PC, and they invited us to go to E3 with them, and we're like, oh, no thanks, that's cool. E3 we felt was a show kind of for the big guys, and PAX was more our speed. But then we thought about it more, thought about maybe we could swing it in a way that wouldn't be super disruptive to our schedule, not have to make a whole new build and all that. We just wanted to like have uninterrupted time working on the game at this point. But at the same time, E3 increasingly looked like an interesting opportunity, and we found ways to make it work. So we showed up, and we found ourselves in LA in July or something like that. And there's tiny little me and tiny little Amir on this giant stage, because Sony has been on this, really values these smaller independent developers. They really put, we were surprised to find ourselves here, needless to say, I guess. Just a couple of years prior, we had our tiny little table at PAX, and here we are on this giant stage. So if you think that feels surreal, you were right. Being, right across, having like a booth right across from like Ubisoft's Watch Dogs or whatever, E3 is just crazy. It was another busy and exciting show, but we were anxious to just get back and make our video game. E3 was like a sort of an unplanned distraction. So once we got back, after all the angst, going into PAX East, the mood on the team I think improved a lot. There were a lot of things that we wanted to improve and change and kind of tweak based on what we'd seen people play and how, like, having had a little time and distance from what we showed at PAX, we did those things. So by the time we went into PAX Prime just a couple of weeks ago here, I think the mood was a lot better. And at this point we're used to going to these shows and we love it. I mean, we love talking to the people whose lives somehow have been like positively impacted in some cases by a game that we made. It's like makes it all. It's an important reminder about what we're doing, and it's nice to kind of feel really weird at these shows also. That never ceases to be amazing. And also just watching hundreds of people play your video game is incredibly useful. And then we go home and get back to work and stop taking photos. So our studio recently celebrated its 4-year anniversary. All our focus now is on our next game. We're in full production, just know where it's going and just building it all out. At this point, Bastion has sold more than 2.2 million copies, which is like All right, I guess. You know, we're still at the studio on Shipley Street in San Francisco. We're thinking about moving back to a house. Our lease is coming up soon, but I hope we get to finish out the project in this space because it feels, you know, the setting I think is sort of tied to the game that we're making. And as for the game, you know, it's much like Bastion. We're really everything is riding on this game for us. It's like the way all the things that worked about how we made Bastion were, to the extent that we could continue that same process, we're doing that on this game just because it's worked out so well for us. And the most important thing for us is just to keep the team together for as long as possible and work on stuff that we can all feel good about, and hopefully, you know, people who play feel good about too. We know that doesn't guarantee anything for the future, and you know, much like in choose your own adventure books or whatever, it's like you never know when your number's going to come up. But thus far, it's been really fun coming up on these decision points and getting to make those choices together and you know, move forward with those decisions and not look back and kind of make the most of it until the next weird, unexpected decision comes up. One of the things that's changed for us is like Bastion, we really kind of burned the candle at both ends. It was our big chance to make something worth a damn. But since we want to be in this for the long haul, like we had to find a way to like get on with our lives and like repair our lives in addition to doing the stuff that we do. So that, you know, and I feel like we've been able to do that to a certain extent. That's Andrew and his wife Vivian. They celebrated their second anniversary this past August. This is Logan officiating Darren's marriage to his wife Michelle. If you look closely, that is the Dungeons and Dragons players handbook. So it runs deep in our studio. And Amir just this past week married his longtime girlfriend Hannah, who I've known as long as I've known Amir, and she's kind of supported him through thick and thin and good times and bad all through this stuff. So, you know, there's a lot I think has happened to us, and yet we've only made this one game so far. And so our hope, I think, is that we do get to stick it out for the long haul, like some of our favorite bands. These bands have been around for like decades, and that's an amazing idea. You don't hear about game developers that get to stick together for that long. I think that's our kind of fantasy around this stuff. So I hope our story is only beginning, and I'll be curious to find out. So that's what I've got. And a few minutes for questions if you guys have any. Thank you very much.
Going back to your decision to kind of move from 2K and go all in with your friends here, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the factors that made you confident and courageous enough to make that jump, because it is one towards uncertainty.
Yeah, so like, I mean, so I was there for some of the formative discussions around Supergiant and Bastion, so even though I was not with the team, it's like, I felt like some of my blood was like in this thing that they were making. And then, but more specifically, more concretely, the opportunity to like write the story for a video game, that was it. I'm like, I need to take that. I was like, what was I, 33 or something like that. I've wanted to make games since I was 8 years old, and like to do like that specifically. And here was my chance. I had no reason to think I would ever get that chance again, because on page, you know, the catch-22 of game development is like, you need to have the experience before someone will ask you to do the work. And I had not written a story for a video game before that had shipped. But these guys, I'd known them long enough. They knew what my ideas were and believed in me enough to give me that chance. Like, I don't think I was ever going to get that opportunity at 2K, at least not for like a really long time. So that was, and also just, again, like a long-standing friendship with these guys. So I mean, it was like not the most rational decision, again, especially with like a new baby at home and stuff like that. But I just had that feeling in the pit of my stomach of like, it's now or never. So that made it easier. And again, thankfully, my family went along with it. Yeah.
I was wondering how you built all your lore for Bastion, and like what was your world building process?
Yeah, my world building process is there is
big Google Doc and I just type it in. So there is a document like that that has, there's like more of the writing on Bastion was like in this document than like in the game itself, because I would just, when the writing is cheap, you could do it whenever, and so as we would have ideas, I would just like basically, it was a very collaborative process kind of with the game design itself. We're a gameplay-driven studio. We don't like start with the story and then like build gameplay to support that. We build a play experience bearing in mind how that could potentially support a narrative and do it very kind of recursively. So as these ideas, like the world coming up around you came up, it's like, well, we need to, why is this happening? Well, say there was some surreal catastrophe. And things of that nature. So the game design would inform some decisions in kind of the fiction, and sometimes the fiction would recursively, inform some aspects of the design. All of the game systems, things like the shrine and the distillery and so forth, like we would design the system first, and then find an aspect, find some interesting kind of fiction, hopefully interesting fictional angle that would like tie it back to the world and make it make sense and add some sort of dimension to the world. So that was. That all happened kind of in parallel, but kind of in a constant like back and forth race with the design itself over time. And that was just me and Amir basically for the most. I mean, Jen was very involved as well as our art director. Like I wouldn't like dictate like the character designs to her, as like give her as much information as was interesting and useful to her, and then she would come back with like something that chances are would be really impressive to us. I think I have time for like one more question, but I'll be out there too if anyone. Any other questions?
So kind of like on that note then, was there a difference designing the story for Bastion, which was kind of already coming together, perhaps already foundations kind of laid, compared to Transistor where you guys were starting from scratch? Did you come at a different approach for the story for that?
No. It was pretty similar. It was also. It's just I don't know. I can't like sugarcoat it. We can't get too invested in the story we want to tell before we have a game. We can have so we start with some high level ideas. And actually, we are pursuing our high-level ideas, much like we did on Bastion. Like the thematic core of Bastion, the story took on much more, specific detail. But what we were going for with it, I think, is what we ended up shipping. I'd like Transistor's not yet done, but having been in pre-production for a while, I take some comfort from knowing that like we're still pursuing the aspects of that world and that story that I think when I think back to those discussions, putting this talk together, those were the aspects that were appealing to us. I think that's still there, but the details, change a lot over the course of it, and as the person doing the writing, there's just a lot of iteration and having to adapt to different changes in the game design and so forth. And yeah, we do have more people, giving feedback and so forth. But as far as the writing process goes, that's still me and Amir. I do the writing, and Amir is my editor, and we work closely together. It's important to us to not do the kind of not have too many cooks in the kitchen, kind of for better or worse. So thank you guys again very much.